Raymond, so last week we ran the first part of our interview where you went into what you meant by the devil is in the big picture about this climate bill, and really brought out what this is all about, the tremendous danger and trajectory of the environmental crisis, the climate crisis, and how this bill does not fix that, does not redress that, but in fact sets us on a very dangerous course that even could be existential for the future of our species. So let's get going again, Raymond. There's two overlapping responses to this bill that typify the leading mainstream environmental spokespeople in the organizations, what they've said about this. First is the line that, well, look, this bill is a start and something is better than nothing. And sometimes some of them will add a point that, look, okay, it's not everything, but once this gets going and there's some progress, then momentum's going to build and there'll be better things to come. And anyway, this might delay some of the most catastrophic impact of accelerating climate change. And as I said, this is the position of a lot of mainstream environmental organizations and progressive Democratic politicians. How do you speak to that in the article, and what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. As I said, if it were a genuine start to a green economy, a sustainable economy, then that would be a very positive thing. But what I'm saying is two things. One, this bill perpetuates the dependency of the U.S. economy on fossil fuels. And I've indicated some of the key measures of that. One, that there's no mandate, no requirement, for, industry and agriculture and transport to slash emissions. There's no requirement, to shut down power plants and that run on fossil fuels, coal and natural gas, and to replace them with sustainably energy-driven power generation. And I also indicated, all of what is not captured in the math, if you will, of the promised carbon emissions. I spoke about overseas operations of U.S. Multinational corporations and, how extensive their carbon emissions are, but that's not counted, in the calculations of how much the U.S. is contributing to the atmospheric pollution caused by the use of carbon. And let's, again, talk about the seriousness of this. There's a new study that we quote that indicates that one of five deaths on this planet are caused by carbon pollution. And I also spoke about, how right now the world is on track to producing twice the amount of emissions that, are beyond the pale of what is required to avoid reaching this point of a temperature rise of 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit in the temperature scale that we use. I also want to mention here that this bill doesn't in any way address the consumption of oil by the U.S. military, the genocidal U.S. military. The U.S. military is the largest single institutional consumer user of oil in the world. And not only that, it's the single largest institutional emitter of carbon in the world. Now let's go into the climate bill and see what it has to say about that. Nada, nothing. The Climate Act provides $369 billion of incentives and subsidies and tax breaks for private corporations to move towards more renewable energy. No mandate, no requirement that they do that. $370 billion over 10 years. Do you know what the U.S. military budget is for next year, for 1 year? $770 billion. That's twice the amount in 1 year of what this 10-year plan budgets for renewable energy. It's a joke. So I want people to really grasp that the wool is being pulled over their eyes on the one hand, They are being lulled to sleep. People that want to see action taken and who are embracing this as at least it's a start. No, it's not a start to a rapid transition to a green economy. It is a perpetuation of a situation where the U.S. is the largest producer of oil and natural gas in the world. It has a military, a genocidal military that enforces its dominance in the world. And people are so desperate for something positive because the bar has been so low for the United States. You know, people should, you know, the welcome that has been greeted, you know, this is historic, the largest single climate legislation. Well, that's true because they've done nothing. Since 1989, when the climate scientist James Hansen appeared before Congress and laid out the facts and the truth of global warming.
Altogether, this evidence represents a very strong case, in my opinion, that the greenhouse effect has been detected and it is changing our climate now.
Was that a wake-up call for U.S. capitalism, imperialism? No, they ignored it. Shortly after he appeared, there was an international treaty signed, the Kyoto Treaty, which was the first global treaty to limit, you know, to not limit, but at least to promise to limit the reduction in carbon emissions. The U.S. couldn't even bring itself to sign that treaty. In 2015, when the Paris Climate Agreement was reached, in the first few days of that conference, Obama lifted controls on the export of oil from the U.S. to other parts of the world. And then a year later, Trump pulls out. And now we're supposed to hail and embrace, you know, this climate law, which, as I said, doesn't come close to acting commensurate with the severity of this crisis. And isn't it interesting, Andy, that at the same time, there's all the hoopla about this climate act as like a whole new world awaits us of sustainable energy, that Biden and the U.S. imperialists are calling on U.S. oil companies to ramp up oil production, calling on Saudi Arabia, a close ally, to ramp up oil production because they want to flood the markets with oil in order to wage their proxy war with Russia, their imperialist rival. So this is the nature of the game right now. And for people to be lulled to sleep is really, really unacceptable. As I said, people are welcoming this because the something is better than nothing argument. But what I'm demonstrating here is that this something is the continuation of U.S. dependency on fossil fuels.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about, and going back to the fact of the accelerating danger, and then what you just called the wool over people's eyes and the celebration of something that is actually not going to redress this situation.
You know, there are people, millions of people, that are so concerned and passionately so about this climate crisis and the role, the culpability of U.S. imperialism. Although people don't understand capitalist imperialism, they do understand that the United States plays this outsized, disproportionate role in this. And all of these phenomena that I described in the first segment, what's happening, the melting of the Greenland glaciers, what's happening in Pakistan, and 1/3 of the country, experiencing floods right now. This is all accelerating. And for people to somehow get solace and comfort in this law, which, as I said, it's not just inadequate in terms of what it's doing on the front of sustainable renewable energy. And again, that's wind, solar power, geothermal, hydro, but principally solar and wind power. It's not in any way affecting the kind of rapid transition to a green economy. And on the other hand, and what I'm emphasizing is that it is prolonging the dependency of the U.S. economy on oil, and not just its dependency, but here's the key link: its dominance in the world. Through its military, through its overseas, networks of production, cheap labor, super exploited. This is, when we talk about supply chains, we hear that in the news in terms of the pandemic and the disruption. But these supply chains are driven by fossil fuel. And all of this is part of the picture and the calculation of U.S. imperialism. And I should say that there is, when we were researching this article, Andy, we were saying, well, is it a total hoax? Is there no concern for renewable energy in any sense? No, there is a strategic concern about renewable energy. And that is not a concern about, putting the U.S. economy and contributing and collaborating with the people of the world, to confront this crisis and to move off of fossil fuels. But there is, a concern that China, which is an imperialist rival of the United States, has the leg up in solar power. 80 to 85% of the world solar panels, are accounted for by China. And the U.S. position in the global market for solar panels and all the raw materials that go into it. And let's face reality again. We're talking about 35,000 child miners in the Congo, who are extracting and hauling out, lithium to fuel as part of the raw materials for, for the batteries for electric vehicles. So the U.S. is putting some attention to developing renewables, but not to replace fossil fuels, but rather to strengthen a component of the U.S. energy mix so that it can compete on a global scale with China, which is now sort of in the front lines of, solar power. And the U.S. is responding to that. But this is all proceeding from maintaining and extending the dominance of U.S. imperialism in the world, not from energy sustainability, but from energy security, geopolitics, geoeconomics, being able to dominate markets. And they are on a collision course with China, as you were saying, a collision course with nature. On the one hand, this is the twofold collision course, a collision course with nature. And then there's a collision course, especially right now, we see three imperialist powers, the United States, Russia, and China, all of whom are using fossil fuels as weapons. And then China is using, sustainable energy, solar, in its bid for economic strength. This is not a world that's coming to grips with an existential crisis. And in fact, at a time when there should be cooperation and collaboration between the people of the world and governments, there is now disengagement, confrontation. In fact, as I mentioned, the climate talks between China and the United States, the two largest emitters of carbon in the world, collapsed over the summer after Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan in a provocative act. So this is kind of the big picture again, Andy, that we keep returning to.
Well, it gets me to the point because all over a progressive press got this thing, you got to accentuate the positive, you see. Otherwise, we're going to demoralize the youth. We're going to demoralize people. If we told them the actual truth here, they would be filled with despair. Yet how demoralized are people going to be if they actually have to confront what is coming without being told the actual truth? And telling people the scientific truth is a big part of what we bring on the RNL show. It's actually at the center of what Bob Avakian has contributed to the scientific approach to society and to revolution. But I'd like you to talk a little bit more about this line of we don't want to feed despair, therefore we're going to accentuate the positive in something that you're saying is not just not good enough, but is actually causing great harm.
Yeah, I think what we're talking about is the truth on two fronts, Andy. One is the truth of science, right? What the science is telling us about global warming, and we've explored that in some depth, already. And then there's the truth about the nature of the system, of the society, the economics, the politics. What is the nature of this capitalist imperialist system and what it is capable of doing and what it is not capable of doing. And here is, the cold truth. This is a system that's capable of destroying the planet through nuclear war. It's a system that is right now put the planet on this course towards environmental devastation. But it's not a system that's capable of doing what science is telling us is necessary, urgently necessary, in terms of getting off of fossil fuels, radically transforming, the economies, the ways in which we live, how we consume, what we consume. And you have people that have two responses. One is they're looking for any kind of thread, and it's threadbare, Andy, any thread of hope, and they want to invest this climate act with, the positive that you're speaking of. And what we've analyzed through the course of our discussions is that this is not a positive. It's not like there's some good things in it and there are some bad things in it, and let's, kind of build up the good. No, this is a coherent imperialist program to maintain U.S. dependency on oil, its dominance, in fossil fuels, its strategic relations with fossil fuel partners like Mexico, Canada, and Saudi Arabia. And they are trying to, on that basis, build out, expand some renewable energy. But that is itself seen in the larger framework of imperialist calculations of energy security, of competing with China and dominating and gaining advantage in different markets. So this is the reality. So you have people that are, one, looking for hope where there is none. And two, you have people who have given up, who become hopeless, who despair. And, you can kind of understand why people would despair if they saw no basis to act. People who are, seeing the magnitude of this crisis, and they see no hope. But there is what Bob Avakian has called hope on a scientific basis, on a scientific foundation.
Well, that's where we're going to go next. But I think it's just to conclude this part of this thing, they are chaining people to the destruction of the environment, and they're chaining people's minds and thinking and actions to the system that is bringing this down on humanity. And that double chain does speak to me of something Bob Avakian said, that the politics of the possible is the politics of monstrosity. It's always, well, this is what we can get done, and this will build hope in people, then we'll see. But actually, the opposite is what's happening. It is a monstrosity which is coming.